Welcome to another episode in our series about the martial arts in Tekken. In the previous video, we went over a rather thematic collection of characters with Lei, Law, and Feng. That's a lot of Chinese martial arts, and there's still more to talk about. But for this episode, we picked up on some of your suggestions. That's why today, we have quite a diverse selection, consisting of the Punch Guy, Kick Dude, and Eddy Gordo. All of them are amazing in their own right, but together, they represent one of the coolest and most endearing aspects of Tekken, which is the amount of passion and love the developers have for real-world martial arts. Let's go over each of them individually and take a better look at the origins of their styles, unique attributes, and how it was carried over into a fighting game. I'm your host, Arya from That Blasted Salami. Let's get into this. Tekken 3 came in swinging with a massive time skip and a whole new generation of cool and charismatic characters. Almost everyone on the roster instantly became a hit and will become a staple for the series going forward, but there were still some standout characters amongst this group. Eddy Gordo was one of such characters. There are many possible reasons to like him. He's fun to play, his animations are amazing, and his outfits are slick. However, what really made him such a highlight is his unique fighting style. The moment you saw Eddy move, you'd be sold. Just look at this, here's your standard fighter, Heihachi, an absolute classic for Tekken. Stoic and intimidating, but also completely static. This man is a rock that will not move. Now let's take a look at Eddy. You feel it? These days we're all quite used to it, but back then, the amount of energy and flow in his animations was mesmerizing. It was also back when you'd scarcely find capoeira in fighting games. SNK deserves credit for trying to do it justice all the way back in 1992, and Capcom actually did an amazing job with Elena. But thanks to Tekken's 3D nature, large movesets, and use of motion reference, Eddy was on a whole other level. But before going over that, we need to learn what capoeira is and where it came from. Out of all the martial arts in the world, capoeira might just have the most fascinating background. When Brazil was first established as a Portuguese colony, slaves were imported there en masse to compensate for the lack of workers. Taken from their homes and forced to work in an unfamiliar land, the slaves needed something that would help them to protect themselves and potentially fight back. This is when capoeira was born, sprouting its roots from the African martial art known as Ngolo. Developed with an understanding that the practitioner might often find themselves at a disadvantage, capoeira incorporated a unique flow of movement that would be incredibly hard to read, whilst also opening access to some really powerful strikes and evasive techniques. The result was so effective that it took multiple soldiers to capture a single capoeirista. These days, capoeira serves as a core part of Brazilian culture, with significant spiritual and artistic elements, like the distinct capoeira music. However, it still finds applications in combat, as plenty of MMA fighters have come to rely on capoeira techniques for strong, accurate, yet tricky kicks. To do this style justice in Tekken, Namco hired Marcelo Pereira, a storied capoeirista who already had experience with movies, TV shows, and was eager to land his expertise for a video game. To put it into perspective, all the crazy stuff you saw Eddy do in Tekken 3 was just 20% of what Marcelo could have done, but since he was injured at the time, couldn't execute some of the more complex elements. When seeing the final product, Pereira ended up rating Eddy a solid 6 out of 10. That might sound surprising, but it's a testament to Marcelo's dedication to the authenticity of his art. While he commended the way Eddy fought, he pointed out that the game lacked the use of traditional move names, and that Eddy's own name didn't have ties to capoeira or even Brazil in general. Outside of mistakes that are next to impossible to notice for your average player, it leaves us to appreciate the unparalleled depiction of capoeira in video games. A depiction that also exposed millions of people to this previously obscure yet fascinating martial art. Joining Tekken alongside Eddy Gordo, Hwoarang was also a new generation character in more ways than one. Not only was he a Tekken 3 newcomer, but he also effectively replaced his predecessor and mentor, Baekdu-san, who was a fellow Taekwondo practitioner. Even though he wasn't quite as flashy as Eddy, Hwoarang offered a special playstyle with his reliance on kicks and smoothly weaving in and out of different stances. When we look at the origins of Taekwondo, things get complicated, to put it lightly. There are several different versions that credit different people as founders and cite different styles as influence. However, much of the research points towards Taekwondo being a blend of traditional Korean martial arts and Shotokan karate, with slight traces of Chinese martial arts too. As to what Taekwondo excels at, it's fairly straightforward. Even though it does include punching and even grappling techniques, kicks are at the front and center of this martial art. What sets Taekwondo kicks apart from everything else is the sheer focus on both power and precision. These kicks aren't there to supplement anything else. They're there to overwhelm and knock people out. This is why Taekwondo routines put emphasis on control, flexibility, and balance. You need to be able to target any part of the body, which can be seen with complex moves like the axe kick or the target kick. You need to deliver those kicks while utilizing all relevant muscles and momentum, and need to maintain balance to transition from one kick to another. When talking about Hwoarang, it's more than likely that he practices the International Federation style of Taekwondo, which represents a more traditional style that originated from General Choi Hong-hai. Despite never being stated outright, we can assume this is thanks to Namco recruiting the help of Hwang Soo-il, a former ITF lightweight world champion, to provide motion capture for Hwoarang's animations in Tekken 3. Putting together all we've learnt about Taekwondo, you can see that Hwoarang embodies all the major principles of the martial art. His kicks often fall into two categories: extremely powerful single strikes that make your life flash before your eyes, or rapid combinations with flowing transitions that made thousands of players quit back to the menu instead of hitting rematch. If we talk about breaking the rules of Tekken, the first character that probably comes to mind nowadays is Akuma, but Steve Fox did just that way ahead of him. Unlike Hwoarang and Eddy, Steve joined us a bit later in Tekken 4. In a way, he's the definitive newcomer for that game, as he exemplifies how bold and experimental Tekken 4 was. You see, Steve is a boxer, and as any dignified gentleman would know, there's no kicking in boxing. Since Tekken developers want to stay faithful to martial arts, instead of forcing kicks into Steve's moveset, they found a clever workaround. They utilized those kick buttons to represent something that every good boxer must have: footwork. When you're using kick buttons with Steve, you're weaving, stepping, ducking, and swaying. In other words, you're evading and positioning around your opponent while still presenting them with a real threat of a quick counter or a whiff punish. Extremely appropriate for a boxer. You'd think that mostly having punch buttons would limit what Steve can do, but you'd be surprised just how much they crammed into his moveset. Not just in terms of actual gameplay, but also in terms of representing the legacy of boxing. Boxing might appear uncomplicated and even brutish on the surface, but there's a lot of depth and technique that goes into switching someone's lights off. Even on a more general level, fighters are usually divided into categories like swarmers, outboxers, sluggers, counterpunchers, and boxer punchers. Steve obviously has all the fundamentals with jabs, hooks, uppercuts, and some basic combinations, but he also does an exceptional job of representing the first two categories, the swarmers and outboxers, with two iconic styles. Starting with outboxing, Steve has the flicker stance, which some might also recognize as the Hitman style used by Ryo Mashiba in Hajime no Ippo. While they are severely exaggerated in their fictional depictions, it's actually based on techniques from a legendary boxer known as Thomas Hearns, who often went by the nickname the Hitman. hence the Hitman style. Due to his unusual height for his weight division, Hearns had an innate reach advantage, which he further amplified by poking his opponents with quick and unpredictable jabs. Even though the man himself wasn't strictly an outboxer, this strategy does fall under that category, and appropriately enough, Steve can enter this stance by holding back after certain moves. Meanwhile, Swarmer is a complete opposite of an outboxer. A Swarmer wants to get right next to you and deliver their bad intentions. Peekaboo stance is perfect for that, as it lets you minimize incoming damage while actively approaching your opponent and cutting off their ways of escape. The renowned coaches, Teddy Atlas and Kuz D'Amato, are credited with originating this style, with D'Amato's protege, Mike Tyson, being the most famous user of peekaboo. The style was a perfect fit for his aggressive prowess, stature, and speed. Just like with flicker stance, it's extremely fitting that you can often enter peekaboo by holding forward and pushing towards your opponent. Just like in real life, it allows Steve to be more aggressive and to smother opponents with pressure. With Tekken 8's heat system, all of these styles might become even more interesting, but only time will tell. And that's all we have for you today. But don't forget, we always read your comments, and the characters for this episode were selected based on your feedback. So if you want to see specific characters in future episodes, please let us know. Until next time, this has been Arya from That Blasted Salami, wishing you an excellent day.